In a time long ago, near the northern edge of the Ganges River basin, in a place called Lumbini, a child was born who would change the course of history. This place, now in southern Nepal, was on the periphery of North Indian civilization, a region organized into tribal republics governed by councils of elders. In the modest surroundings of these tribal communities, a child named Siddhartha was born into the noble Sakya clan. His father, King Shuddhodana, ruled their small kingdom from Kapilavastu. Despite the grand palaces described in ancient texts, archaeological evidence suggests a simpler life for these people on the fringes of society. Before Siddhartha's birth, his mother, Queen Mahamaya, had a vivid dream where a white elephant entered her womb. 10 months later, while strolling through the lush gardens of Lumbini, she gave birth to her son. The child was no ordinary newborn. He emerged from under her right arm, walked immediately, and spoke, declaring that this would be his final birth. The king, curious about his son's future, called upon the court astrologers. 7 predicted that the boy would either become a great king or a Buddha. The 8th astrologer, however, was certain, this child was destined for enlightenment. Siddhartha grew up in luxury, his father determined to shield him from the harsh realities of the world. He was given palaces for every season and surrounded by all forms of pleasure, including 40,000 attendants. At the age of 16, he married the beautiful Princess Yashodhara, and together, they lived a life of opulence. Yet, despite the abundance, a sense of unease lingered within him. One day, when Siddhartha was 29, he requested a ride through the city in his chariot. The king, wanting to protect his son, ordered all sick and elderly people to be removed from the route. But fate had other plans. On this journey, Siddhartha encountered an old man for the first time. Startled by the sight, he learned that aging was a fate that awaited all, including himself and his loved ones. This discovery was followed by more revelations on subsequent trips. He saw a sick person, a corpse, and finally, a serene mendicant deep in meditation. These sights profoundly impacted him, awakening a desire to seek the truth beyond the palace walls. The revelations of sickness, old age, and death weighed heavily on Siddhartha's heart. When he learned that his wife had given birth to a son, whom he named Rahula, meaning fetter, it solidified his resolve. That night, Siddhartha made a decision that would change his life forever. He entered his wife's chamber, taking a final glance at her and their newborn son, and then silently left the palace. He cut off his hair, donned the simple robes of an ascetic, and began his journey into the forest in search of enlightenment. Siddhartha's journey took him across many lands, where he studied under various teachers and practiced intense meditation. He even tried extreme forms of self-mortification, reducing his daily food intake to a single pea. His body became emaciated, his ribs protruding, and his eyes sunken. Despite these hardships, Siddhartha realized that such extreme asceticism was not the path to true liberation. Accepting a meal of rice and cream from a kind young woman, he chose a middle path, balancing between indulgence and deprivation. After 6 years of searching, Siddhartha's journey led him to the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. There, he vowed to meditate until he found the answer to suffering. Through the night, he faced various trials, both internal and external, but by morning, he achieved enlightenment. He had discovered the path to liberation from the cycle of rebirth and suffering. Siddhartha had become the Buddha, the awakened one. The Buddha spent the rest of his life teaching the path to enlightenment, gathering disciples who would carry his teachings forward. His legacy extended far beyond his physical life, as his teachings spread across the world, offering a way to escape the suffering of samsara. The Buddha was not the first to find this path, nor would he be the last. According to tradition, the next Buddha, Maitreya, will appear in a distant future to guide humanity once again. Under the shadow of a great tree, a young prince sat in deep contemplation. Siddhartha Gautama had once lived in a luxurious palace, surrounded by every comfort. But the suffering he had seen in the world, the inevitable pains of birth, aging, sickness, and death, had driven him to seek a way out of the endless cycle of rebirth. Convinced that the path to enlightenment lay in extreme self-denial, he had abandoned his life of luxury and adopted the austere practices of an ascetic. For 6 long years, he starved his body and tortured his mind, hoping to find the truth. But as time passed, his body weakened, and his spirit waned. His companions, convinced that self-mortification was the only way to enlightenment, grew disillusioned with him when he began to question their harsh practices. They abandoned him, leaving Siddhartha alone, without a teacher or friend. Yet, despite their desertion, Siddhartha was resolute. He vowed that he would sit beneath a nearby tree, a Bodhi tree, and not rise until he had discovered the state beyond birth and death. As Siddhartha meditated, the full moon of May bathed the land in a soft, ethereal glow. It was a night like no other. Mara, the god of desire, who ruled over the cycle of life and death, sensed the prince's intentions. Fearing that Siddhartha would break free from his control, Mara unleashed his fury. A storm of wind, rain, and darkness engulfed the prince. Rocks, weapons, and hot coals hurled towards him, but Siddhartha remained unmoved, his mind focused solely on love and compassion. The fierce storm transformed into a shower of soft blossoms, falling harmlessly at his feet. Mara, growing desperate, summoned his 3 beautiful daughters, Lust, Thirst, and Discontent, to tempt the prince. They danced before him, trying to seduce him, but Siddhartha's heart was pure, and he did not waver. In a final attempt, Mara challenged Siddhartha's right to the spot beneath the tree, claiming it as his own. Siddhartha, calm and unwavering, stretched out his right hand and touched the earth. He called upon the goddess of the earth to bear witness to his right, earned through countless lifetimes of virtuous deeds. The earth trembled in acknowledgement, and Mara, defeated, retreated into the shadows. As the night deepened, Siddhartha entered a profound state of meditation. During the first watch of the night, visions of his past lives flooded his mind. He saw where he had been born, his names, his roles, and even the food he had eaten. With each vision, his understanding grew deeper. In the second watch, he saw how all beings are bound to the cycle of rebirth, their fates determined by the karma they had accumulated through their actions. He understood that suffering was inherent in this cycle, and that ignorance was the root cause. In the final hours before dawn, as the world slept, Siddhartha reached the pinnacle of his meditation. He achieved a profound realization, the 4 noble truths. He understood that suffering was an inescapable part of life, but he also saw the path to its cessation. Ignorance led to desire, desire to action, and action to birth, aging, and death. But by eliminating ignorance, the cycle could be broken. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha, the awakened one, who had roused himself from the slumber of ignorance and saw the universe with clear eyes. For 7 weeks after his enlightenment, the Buddha remained near the Bodhi tree, savoring the bliss of his newfound wisdom. During one of these weeks, as rain poured down, the serpent king Mukalinda emerged from the earth and spread his hood above the Buddha, protecting him from the storm, a scene that would be immortalized in countless works of art. After 7 weeks, 2 merchants approached the Buddha, offering him honey and cakes. The gods of the 4 directions each offered the Buddha a bowl, which he magically collapsed into one to receive the food. In return, the Buddha plucked some hairs from his head and gave them to the merchants as a blessing. Unsure of how to proceed, the Buddha considered keeping his profound insights to himself, believing that few would understand them. But the god Brahma descended from the heavens and implored the Buddha to teach, pointing out that some beings would benefit from his wisdom. Convinced, the Buddha set out to find his first disciples, deciding that his 5 former companions would be the most suitable. Through his clairvoyance, he saw that they were residing in a deer park in Sarnath, near Varanasi. The Buddha set out on foot, determined to share what he had learned. The 5 ascetics, who had once abandoned Siddhartha, were living in the deer park when they saw the Buddha approaching. Though they had resolved to ignore him, they were compelled by his presence and rose to greet him. They asked what new understanding he had gained since they parted ways, and the Buddha began to teach. This was the moment when the Buddha set the wheel of the Dharma in motion. In his first sermon, the Buddha spoke of the middle way, a path between the extremes of self-indulgence and self-mortification. He explained that both were fruitless and led only to more suffering. He then introduced the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to the cessation of suffering. The Buddha explained that the path to liberation involved right view, right attitude, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation, an eightfold path that would guide his followers towards enlightenment. As the Buddha spoke, the 5 ascetics listened intently. Soon, they understood the depth of his wisdom and became arhats, beings who had achieved liberation from rebirth and would enter nirvana upon death. They became the first members of the Sangha, the community of monks who would carry the Buddha's teachings across the land. As the Buddha's fame spread, news of his enlightenment reached his father, King Suddhodana. The king, who had believed his son was lost to the world, sent 9 delegations to invite him back to Kapilavastu. But each delegation, upon hearing the Buddha's teachings, became his disciples and never returned to the palace. Finally, the 10th envoy succeeded in convincing the Buddha to return to his homeland. When the Buddha arrived in Kapilavastu, the elders of his clan greeted him with skepticism. To demonstrate his enlightenment, the Buddha rose into the air, and flames and water issued simultaneously from his body, a miraculous display that awed his relatives into reverence. However, instead of going to the palace for the noon meal, the Buddha went begging from door to door, following the practice of all Buddhas before him. This humble act caused his father great distress, but the Buddha explained that this was the way of those who had renounced the world. His wife, Yashodhara, who had remained faithful to him during his long absence, did not go out to greet him. Instead, she waited for the Buddha to come to her, as a recognition of her virtue. When the Buddha did so, she bowed before him, placing her head on his feet, a poignant moment that symbolized her acceptance of his path. Later, she would join the order of nuns and attain enlightenment herself. For 45 years, the Buddha traveled across northeastern India, teaching the Dharma to anyone who would listen. He debated with other spiritual leaders, converted followers from all walks of life, and established an order of monks and nuns who would carry on his teachings. He taught the practice of refuge, the 5 precepts, and various forms of meditation, guiding countless souls towards liberation. As the Buddha neared 80 years of age, he sensed that his time on earth was coming to an end. During his final journey, he fell seriously ill after eating a meal offered by a blacksmith named Kunda. Despite his pain, the Buddha assured Kunda that he should not feel remorse, as the meal had been a blessing and would lead to Kunda's spiritual benefit. The Buddha reached the town of Kushinagar, where he lay down between 2 sal trees. As he rested, the trees blossomed out of season, and flowers rained down upon him. The Buddha addressed his disciples one last time, urging them to be diligent in their practice and to seek their own salvation through self-effort, as he could only show them the way. With those words, the Buddha entered into a deep meditation and passed into nirvana, leaving behind the cycle of rebirth forever. This story of the Buddha's journey from prince to enlightened teacher continues to inspire millions around the world, reminding us of the potential for awakening within each of us.